Today we're going to be starting a new serving tray project, and we're going to be using this piece of black walnut that I milled probably 3 or 4 years ago at this point now. So this is plenty dry. We're going to go ahead and cut it in half before we plane it. It does have a little warp to it from when it dried, so I think if I cut it in half first, it's going to be a lot easier to plane, and we're going to end up losing less just because we're not trying to get the U out of it. Once we get it cut in half, we'll have a resin river going through the center. We're going to be using some clear resin and then putting in some of these wine bottle corks that my friend sent me. So we'll go ahead and get this cut and we'll get going. So I just rough planed these down and kind of cut them a little square. They're not perfect, but this is not the final dimension, so I'm leaving some room to do a final trimming once this is done. But we are flat on the bottom now, and I'm going to go ahead and put these into the mold. Now I think what I'm going to do is pour just a base layer, probably an 1/8 inch thick, so that way these corks are going to float in the resin. So I'm going to pour this base layer and let that cure, and that way I can actually glue the corks down, so when we pour the rest of it, they're not just going to float to the top. So we're using the Alumilite Amazing Deep Pour Resin again. This is 2:1 as a mix ratio by volume. So I've already got a little bit mixed up here, and we'll go ahead and just pour this, and that'll give us a nice little base layer just at the bottom here. So it's been a week since this base layer got poured, and I went ahead and sanded it down with some 400 grit to make sure that the resin we pour next is going to stick to it. I also went ahead and flattened the bottom of the corks. I was a little worried about how much room we were going to have on top of them. I want to make sure I have enough resin to where the corks aren't sticking out and that I still have a little bit of room for sanding, so that's why I ended up doing that. I've got these all placed in here, and now what I'm going to do is go ahead and start to super glue these down. They're corks, so obviously they will float, so hopefully just with some super glue we can hold these in place. So while that glue dries, we've got this hole here, and I'm going to fill it with kind of this burgundy-ish wine colored resin. This is just some Alumilite red dye and then some dark purple mica powder. So we'll go ahead and get this little hole filled. And then we'll go ahead and mix up a batch of the Alumilite Deep Pour, and we'll get this poured. So we've got our first batch of Deep Pour all mixed up. I'm not really sure how much this is going to take. So we'll get this one poured and then we'll see how much more we need. So that first pour got us pretty close to the top. So I've gone ahead and mixed up about half of what we did the first pour, and we'll get that poured on top. So that seems to be a perfect amount. It is just coming over the edge of this. I'm gonna let this sit for probably 2 or 3 hours, and those corks are gonna give off some air. So in 2 or 3 hours, I'm gonna come with the heat gun and just knock down all the bubbles. So the resin level sunk down just a little bit in a couple spots and was below where our wood line was. So after that main pour cured, I went ahead and just roughed it up real quick and did another really small pour just to bring that level up so everything is above the wood now. So that's been curing a few days, and our main pour has been curing for over probably 2 weeks now. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this unmolded. So this is sanded down to 1000 grit, and I went ahead and just blew everything off with the air compressor to get any of the dust out of the little pores. So now I'm gonna go ahead and get this cleaned up with some alcohol. Just get any of that dust off. And then once that dries, we'll take this outside into the garage and we will spray some lacquer on it. So throughout the design and the build of this project, the person I'm making this for and I have both been kind of back and forth on if it should have handles or not. And at first he really wanted them and I didn't, and then he decided he didn't want them. But the more I thought about it, I kind of liked the idea. This is going to be a serving tray, and as you know, you should never cut resin like as a cutting board. It'll chip out and could potentially get into the food you're cutting, and you could have some serious health issues because of that. So I think the handles kind of distinguish this as a serving tray and not a cutting board. And also, since we did have to sand the backside of these corks, it is kind of a one-way tray. So this side is up, and I think the handles will kind of help distinguish which way this goes. So my friend didn't want them, and I told him I was going to order a pair and see how they looked. If he didn't like them, I'd use them on a different project, because now I do kind of like the idea. And when I sent him the picture, he instantly loved it. So we are going to put the handles on here. And I've gone ahead and just with some painter's tape, put some tape here, and then I measured and drew some lines. And I used the tape so I didn't get this all marked up with pencil and stuff. I've got my holes laid out for where we need to drill. And we're just going to take this over to the drill press real quick and drill out the 4 holes for the handles. So the screws that the kit came with are just these button head ones. In order to make sure this doesn't scratch up the countertop or anything it's sitting on, we're going to swap these out for some countersunk screws, which means we're just going to have to quickly countersink these. So I've got a countersink bit in here, and we'll just gently hit the edges. And we'll just keep taking this down until our screw sits nice and flush in there. So I installed the handles and made sure our holes lined up, and they line up perfectly. The handles fit no problem. So now what I'm gonna do is come back with a 1000 grit sanding pad, and we're just gonna wet sand some of the high spots. A lot of times the wood will absorb a lot of the lacquer and the resin won't, so we've got kind of some high spots here. So we're gonna knock everything down to a nice even surface, and then we'll go ahead and continue to finish this with more lacquer.